God bless everybody tonight. It's September 27th of 2020. You can always find all my articles, videos, timelines, flowcharts on my eschatology page at End of Days Survival at endofdayssurvival.com. You can also go to my Facebook page at End of Days Survival, or you can visit my YouTube channel and check out all my videos. I have just recently added a video presentation of the Book of Revelation, and it's going to go over a lot of what's on the chart tonight. Why I believe the shofar warning of September 19th was important. And I also did a in-depth study on and video on Revelation and my timeline and 117-step calendar also. Today we're going to look at an updated review of the meaning and timing of Daniel 8, Daniel 12, and Psalm 90:10. As we've talked before, I've said for a while now, a couple years, almost 3 years, that I believe Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the leader of Turkey, is the white horseman of Revelation, and that when he went into Syria, invaded Syria on Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement on October 9th of 2019, he started what I call the sorrows. Now these sorrows and birth pains, this period is from the time our Lord Jesus breaks the first seal of Revelation in Revelation 6:1 to the signing of the covenant of death, or the 7-year peace treaty with the nations or Antichrist. Once the signing occurs, tribulation starts and lasts 1260 days, as stated in Revelation 11:1. So as you can see, from the time the first seal is broken, which I say is on Yom Kippur on October 9th of 2019, to the signing of the covenant of death, or the 7-year treaty with the nations, we are in the sorrows and birth pains. So if I'm right, on October 9th of 2019, on Yom Kippur, when Erdogan invaded Syria, he unleashed the first seal. Jesus was standing at that time in heaven, breaks the first seal, and starts the sorrows and birth pains upon the earth. With Erdogan being the first horseman, he will bring forth the next 3 horsemen. And just as we saw him released on October 9th of 2019 when he invaded Syria, and as Erdogan invades Syria, just shortly after that, we see that the corona may have silently existed in China as early as October. Since he went into Syria, we've had corona, a lot of economic upheaval, supply chain disruptions. There's all kinds of rioting and rumors of war and physical wars, and we're seeing this division of the Arab nations and the Muslim nations, so that we're starting to see treaties drawn up and sides are starting to divide. And as we get into this last weekend, we saw something that I thought was extremely important. Then I realized about a week prior to the Sabbath of the 19th, September 19th, on the Feast of Trumpets on Rosh Hashanah, they were potentially going to blow the shofar on the Temple Mount. So Jeremiah 4:5 tells us that this could be a potential judgment against Israel and Judah. And if we go into this and look at what I'm trying to tell everybody here, it tells us in Jeremiah 4:5, declare ye in Judah, and publish in Jerusalem, and say, blow ye the trumpet, or the shofar, in the land. Now this is important because I originally stressed that they shouldn't blow it on the temple itself on the Sabbath, because they should only blow it in the temple. So this would be a real problem if they actually did blow it on the temple. But they shouldn't blow it in the land either. At first I thought they actually had blown it on the temple, because they had actually placed loudspeakers and other things on the temple itself, and I thought, oh, this is this is really bad. Regardless, it's bad that they actually blew it in Israel on the Sabbath, and there were actual people trying to get on the temple to blow this shofar on a prohibited day. And so people were actually trying to do this, and so it was going to be a even more amplified problem if they had, I think. And so you can see that it was a problem. You know, they had to stop people from doing this. Many of the old rabbis, or the old school rabbis, came out and declared that this was prohibited. It shouldn't happen. They tried to warn the population of Israel and, well, the Christians and Jews that were going to blow the shofar. It's mainly for the Jews, but they're trying to warn them not to do this. This Rabbi Dov Lior, and I'm probably saying his name wrong. This man has served as a chief rabbi of the Hebrew, and he is also on the council of rabbis for Judah and Samaria. So he pulls a lot of weight, and so he was pretty adamant that this was prohibited, and tried to warn the community that this wasn't supposed to happen. But the newer Jews want to try to get Messiah here, and so they think by blowing this horn that they're going to bring in the Messiah, and in reality this is going to bring forth the armies of the north, and over time, in the next 3 to 4 years, the Antichrist. So I was trying to warn everybody that the blowing of this shofar on September 19th of 2020 was prohibited, and that God did not want his people to have this happen, or there would be a judgment or a curse against these people. And if you go into Joel 1 and 2 as we get into this, you'll realize that this is a serious judgment where 2/3 of the Jews will perish in this. So to me, this is a curse. And they brought their own judgment upon themselves by blowing this trumpet. So let's look at Jeremiah 4:5 again. It says, "Declare in Judah and publish in Jerusalem." And they did publish this. They were trying to get the shofar to be blown. They were going to Netanyahu to get his approval, but it never happened. As far as I can tell, it didn't happen. But it doesn't matter, because it says they are going to blow this trumpet in the land. So they're blowing it on the street. And this is a problem, because if you look at the Jewish rules, and I'm not going to go back through all this again, it is prohibited to take anything across the threshold of their homes, physical items other than their clothes, and then they can only go so far away, and they're not supposed to do any kind of work or servitude. So it's against the laws to allow them to even remove the shofar across their doorstep and take it to the temple anyway, because this could potentially cause problem when they were doing the festivals and different things, to have people moving from place to place, and then having holy items being transported back and forth. So that's why they don't do it. And they're supposed to gather together, which they did. They all got up on the rooftops and they assembled, and they went into the defense cities, or the fortified cities, which are Israel and Judah and all the places in Israel. And it said once they blow this, they will set up a standard towards Zion. which means they're going to, it's like a flag, you know, we're putting a flag towards Zion, and that will then bring forth the evil from the north and great destruction, which I've talked for some time is Erdogan, which is Daniel 8 and Ezekiel 38-39, and I'm going to go over how this works on this timeline. But this is going to bring on a judgment, a sort of curse against this nation, and that the lion is going to come up in his thicket, and the destroyer of the Gentiles is on the way. Because why? Once Joel 1 and 2 happens, and 2/3 of the nation of it, the Jews are perished in these judgments of plagues and Gog, as I'll show you on this graph coming up here. Only 1/3 are removed to the remnant. You know, they're the remnant. They're taken away. And so this is going to be a terrible judgment against Israel. And after that remnant is taken away, guess what? Then the destroyer of the Gentiles is on the way. Because why? The Gentiles trample on the holy city for 1260 days. He is gone forth from his place to make thy land desolate. Because after the 1260 days, what happens? He creates abomination of desolation on the Temple Mount itself. He will lay all the cities to waste, because after desolation we see those two witnesses rise, because they've been on the temple prophesying for 1260 days, and then they're overcome shortly after abomination, and then they lay in the street for 3.5 days and then rise, because they're resurrected, they're taken to heaven, and then God tells them that after that they run away from this place, because you don't want to look back. It's like Sodom and Gomorrah. You don't want to be there. You don't want to look back. You don't want to remember it. Just get out of this place. And so he's going to make the land desolate. Abomination of desolation is going to happen. Antichrist is going to lash out, and the Lord is going to not turn back his anger from this. And so if you go back to my chart, and we go back to the beginning here, at the unleashing of the first seal on Yom Kippur, we're going to work through the sorrows here to the treaty, the signing of the treaty. And so once Erdogan was released on Yom Kippur on October 9th, we started to see the corona come out, the economic upheaval, all that stuff. We're starting to see a number of places locked down. We just saw the UK is going to lock down for 6 more months. We see reinfections in China and all over the place. Like I said, there's a 5-week spike from the beginning of an unlocking to the time we see a peak. And so we had the unlocking in Labor Day. That started to bring on some major problems. The schools opened up, the sports started to open up. People are getting fed up wearing masks and things like that, and being tied up in their homes and different things like that. So we're starting to see these waves of reinfections starting to happen all over the world. It's not just here. This is happening all over the world. So I've added this step. This wasn't here before. This has been added. This is new. And I do believe it is a major event that will affect Israel as we move forward. We started to see a lot of rioting in the country. The stress of the election coming up in November is weighing heavily on everyone. It's affecting everything from the stimulus that they're not, Democrats want a lot more money on the stimulus side than the Republicans, so no one's agreeing on how to do that. We're starting to see a lot of defaults happening. We're starting to see a lot of permanent layoffs, and people just aren't doing well. We're going into about 8, 9, 10 months of this now, and it's not improving. It's going to get worse as we start to see us go into the fall. Second wave, flu season is going to hit, and so these lockdowns are going to continue. I've said for a while that we can look at the vaccinations, and the vaccinations aren't going to happen anytime soon. This coronavirus is not going to go away anytime soon. Everybody's got hope that they're going to get a vaccination, but even if they get a vaccination tomorrow, they can't get everybody vaccinated. It'll take 2 years to vaccinate 8 billion people. Even if they vaccinate these people, it's about a 40 to 60 optimal ratio of people that are going to have some coverage by this thing, and half the population is not going to take this anyway, and so you're going to get about a 25% coverage, and you're talking about potentially only being able to make about 40 million doses of the vaccination in any one month between all the different facilities and things. I mean, it takes a lot to produce these vaccinations and get them out there. And so, how many months will it take to produce the amount of vaccinations they need to vaccinate everybody? And is it a one-dose vaccination or a two-dose vaccination? Are we going to have to take it every year? And so this is a every year process. So there's a lot of different things that have to be thought about in what we're doing and how we're affecting this disease that's affecting the whole world. And now we're starting to see multiple countries start to re-lock down, from the UK to other places. So this is not going to go anyway time soon. We're starting to see a lot of supply chain disruptions. I do curbside shopping for groceries, so we call the groceries in and we get our order, and then they bring it out to the vehicle and place them in the vehicle. And I'm telling you, I'm having to go to 2 or 3 different locations now to get basic items that you normally would want or use, because they just don't have them. They don't either have them in stock, or they're not. Maybe they have them in the store, but they're hoarding them for the people that are coming in the store. I don't know what's going on there, but you're not being able to get things. So we're having some serious supply chain disruptions. One thing that we are seeing a lot of problems with are a lot of the meats. The local regional guys are doing a lot of the general processing for the local areas, and so you're starting to see different types of methods on how we handle these supply chain disruptions. But if people start to get sick that effectively handle a lot of the main supply chains, or the power grids, or water treatment plants, or things of necessity, there's going to be a point in time where, if these people can't make it to work or can't show up, or God forsake that any of them would perish, and they don't have a way to fill these vacancies easy with people that have the ability to do the job, or will go in and do the job, this is a problem for everyone. So we want to watch the next 6 months as this starts to break down more and more, as we start to see these waves of birth pains, corona, economic disruptions, rioting, the election cycle, I don't think the election cycle is going to go regardless of who wins this election, Biden or Trump, and God forsake it's Biden, because I believe that we'll lose the soul of this country if he does win. He'll take us down the progressive ladder of no return. And Trump, I believe, has been appointed to this country to bring us back to God and to remove some of these terrible policies of abortion and other things. But like I said, he's done some things that I also don't agree with and that is the division of the land of Israel. That will be a problem. There will be a judgment against that nation, and this Kirchner Treaty that's been placed in that is out there now will be the 7-year treaty that will be signed. And so it's already in place. It hasn't been signed. It won't be signed until Antichrist is on the ground, and that's a ways down the road here. So this is why I believe the 2300 days of Daniel are important. If you go into Daniel 8 and 12, he gives us 3 sets of days that we need to watch for: the 1290 days, the 1335 days, and the 2300 mornings and evenings. And the other one that I always brought you back to is the 1260 days, which everybody knows is from the signing of the covenant of death to abomination of desolation. So if we review Daniel 8 and 12, 3 sets of days are going to stand out: the 1290 days, the 1335 days, and the 2300 days. Daniel 8 states that when I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one that spoke, how long is the vision concerning the continual burnt offerings, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary, and the host to be trampled under foot? And he said unto him, 2300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. So the sanctuary is going to be restored. New Jerusalem comes down. You work back 2300 days. This is talking about the ram goat war, all the things that are going to happen to the time of the starting of the ram goat war, all the way to the restoration of the temple, or the sanctuary will be restored. So if you take that from the Feast of Tabernacles on October 17th, or 16th and 17th, or the outer date of the 17th of 2027, you work that back 2300 days, that'll take you to June 30th of 2021. So you need to understand where that 2300 days is coming in. It's from the sanctuary has been restored. New Jerusalem was placed down on the ground. God is with us. You work that back 2300 days. That takes you to June 30th of 2021. You got to use the Hebrew calendars here to understand these things. It's a 360-day calendar. They have multiple calendars, but this one is the Hebrew calendar, the Jewish calendar of the 360 days, and that deals with the days and the evenings, which is the sun and the moon. It deals with both in this calendar, and so that's why they use this calendar. But in Daniel 12, it says this: and from the time that the continual burnt offerings are taken away, and the abomination that make desolate is set up. So that's a time span. Look at that. From the time the continual burnt offerings are taken away to the time abomination is set up. And that's what I keep saying. If you go to here, or 30 days prior to the signing of the treaty, Antichrist will stop the continual burnt offerings. You work 1290 days forward through the 1260 days, that takes you to abomination. So what he's telling you is, once they take the continual burnt offerings away and they set up the abomination, there shall be 1,290 days. And then he says, blessed are those who come to the 1,335 days, but go your way until the end, and you shall rest and shall stand on your allotted place at the end of days. And that's why I keep saying, if you go back up here, the 1,335 days are for the time that the people go through tribulation, through great tribulation, to the time of the seventh trumpet, when our Lord comes back, and we have the rapture just shortly after that. And so that's that shortened second half, or that extra 75 days, 1260 days from the start of the signing of the covenant of death. Tribulation starts, you have abomination, that's 1260 days. You move 75 days ahead, that's 1335 days. He shortens that second half, because once abomination happens and those two witnesses go up into heaven, and that's an extremely important event. So I've added this part here to this graph, or this timeline, because it's important. The two witnesses, once the signing of the covenant of death or the treaty with the nation happens, the two witnesses appear and prophesy on the temple for 1260 days. So they go to abomination. And then, shortly after that, they are overcome by Antichrist. And so these two witnesses perish. And 3.5 days later, they're resurrected and taken to heaven. And God tells us, when you see this, do not look back. Don't grab anything. Don't look back. It's like Sodom and Gomorrah. You'll turn into salt. You don't want to look back. This is a remembrance that you don't want to remember. God is placing judgment down. And so when these two rise, even Antichrist knows at that point his time is over. And so he is going on a killing spree at this point. Any Christian, if he can't convert him, he's going to kill him at this point. It's just that simple. And so when we get to this, two witnesses dying shortly after abomination, and then rising 3.5 days after they lay in the street for 3.5 days, and they're rejoicing that this Antichrist has overcome these two beings that have prophesied on God's temple for 1260 days, now are dead and laying in the street for 3.5 days, and they're then taken up. Satan, or in this case, Antichrist and the false prophet, know that this is a bad thing, and so their time is extremely short at that point. God tells us in Daniel 12 that he has to shorten this to 1335 days. So from the signing of the covenant of death, you move that ahead 1335 days. That's that second shortened half. And so you get the 75 days. And once you hit abomination of desolation, you start into great tribulation. This is being the worst possible time, if we make it this far on the planet, for the Christians and Jews, because he will be killing everything that's left. And that's why God has to shorten this time. And so when we get to that 75-day gap between abomination of desolation to the Feast of Trumpets on October 2nd and 3rd of 2027, we see our Lord come back on the seventh trumpet, and then the rapture of the elect saints and martyrs just shortly after that. And then within 7 days after that, you have Yom Kippur on October 10th and 11th of 2027, or the Day of Atonement. And I realized there was something really cool with the wedding. We're talking about a wedding of God with the earth, with New Jerusalem, his bride. And if you go down to one of the 18 different Jewish wedding ceremony rituals, and I thought this was really important, this goes with that Yom Kippur that I was just talking about, that they have this ritual called the circling. And when the couple first enters the huppah, and I'm probably saying this wrong, the bride circles the groom 7 times, representing the 7 wedding blessings and the 7 days of creation. 7 days. And demonstrating that the groom is the center of her world. To make the ancient ritual reciprocal, many couples opt to circle each other. So I thought this was important, because once you get to the 3rd of October on Feast of Trumpets, there's 7 days between the Feast of Trumpets on the October 3rd to Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, on October 10th. And I just thought that was sort of an interesting thing. We're working into the marriage here, and God's pouring down the wrath at this point, and he's going to be with us on the Feast of Tabernacles, and that's 15 days. And that's something else I wanted to explain to you on this video, maybe a little better. This 15 days, or 1 hour of God. This is important to understand. I want people to understand the equation that I use to do this, so that you can understand between the 2nd and the 17th of October, this is a 15-day event, and this is 1 hour of God. So to extrapolate this down from 1,000 years as 1 day of God, as 1,000 years of ours, you need to understand how to break that down. So when he says it's an hour of God, how many days is that for us? Now, it's not always literal, but when he's talking about within his 1,000 years as one of ours, we need to understand, what does that mean to us? So if you take 1,000 years times 360 days, this gives you a total number of days of 360,000 days. So 1 day of God is 1,000 years on earth, or 360,000 days if you use the Hebrew calendar. Then if you need to work this backwards to break it down into real time today. And so if you break it down into years, months, weeks, days, minutes, and seconds for today's time, 360,000 days divided by 1,000 years equals 360 days. It's not that hard. God uses the Hebrew calendar, or the lunisolar calendar, of 360 days in 1 year. You take the 360 days and divide this number by the total number of hours in a day, or 24, and that gives you 15. It's that simple. So the equation would be this: 360,000 total days divided by 1,000 years divided by 24 hours in a day equals 15 hours, or 15 days, excuse me. So 1 hour of the Lord's day would be like 15 days here on earth. So that's how I came up with this equation of 15 days equals 1 hour of God. And so it's important that, this affects us when we hear about the 7th seal breaking, and you have the half an hour, about the half an hour of silence? Well, that's about 7.5 days. And then we have the selection of the 144,000. So it's important that you understand how we need to think about God's time in relationship to our time. So it's important that we understand those 4 sets of dates so that we can understand the timeline. And then from the timeline, we can understand what's coming up in the next 7 years. And so it's important that we understand that once Erdogan broke that first seal on Yom Kippur on October 9th of 2019 and started this madness that we're seeing in front of us, from a disease, potential economic collapse, we're seeing lockdowns, all these different things, war, Turkey's breaking out in 5 or 6 different locations now. You're starting to see the division of the Arab nations to the Muslim nations, the Christians and Jews. We're having all the rioting and different things in the streets, economic different collapses of governments, food shortages, breakdown of supply chains, different things like that. As we get into these 2300 days of Daniel on June 30th of 2021, based on if you go from the Feast of Tabernacles, when the sanctuary is restored, or God's New Jerusalem was placed on the earth, 2300 days back to June 30th of 2021, we're going to start to see what I call the Daniel 8 effect. The Daniel 8 effect is a number of things that lead us to the presentation or the rising of Antichrist. So once we get to June 30th, at least based on my timeline, based on God's calendar dates of his feasts, all his different celebrations and things, we have to look at those calendars. They're extremely important. We're going to need to see that Daniel 8 ram goat war. Okay, so in this time between June 30th of 2021 and around March 21st of 2024, we're going to see a number of events start to happen. You're going to see that Daniel 8 ram goat war, where Turkey, well, first of all, Iran and the Kurds align. So you have the Persians and the Medes, they align. The Kurds are pushed out of Syria and Iraq and the Middle East into Iran, align with them, and then we will see Turkey run over like a whirlwind and crush them both, as it tells us in Ezekiel and Daniel 8, Daniel 11, he's going to do. Once Turkey destroys both Iran and the Kurds, this will then allow him to gain that Ottoman crown, that white horseman crown. And so he will become the new Ottoman emperor and be crowned. This will make him then legitimately, he's given a crown. If you look at that white horseman, he is given a crown. He does not start out with the crown. He's given it over time. So over time, he will be given the white horseman crown. Then with this white horseman, this Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39 and Daniel 8, we're going to start to see plagues start to decimate Israel, as Joel 1 tells us. 10 nations of Muslims will form together. We'll see a decimation of not only a third by locusts and plagues, and part of that locusts and plagues might be actually Gog, because he's going to decimate them by the sword. And so Joel 2 tells us that these 10 nations will start to form, and then we will start to see the Ezekiel effect. The Ezekiel effect is Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39 will have 10 nations then go against Israel. But once they get to Israel, we will see the destruction of Gog and his 10 nations, or Erdogan, And the 10 nations that go against Israel will be destroyed by the wrath of the Lamb. In Revelation 6:16, we talk about the wrath of the Lamb. We're talking about Jesus is opening the 7 seals. We're talking about the destruction of his people, his nation. 2/3 of them are dead at this point, and 1/3 are fleeing. And then Jesus' wrath destroys these 10 nations. They have a burial of 7 months in the valley of Ham and Gog. So all these armies, all 10 nations are pummeled by God or Jesus. You know, he's sending surgical strikes down. You look at that 6th seal, it's brutal. And you look at Joel 2, it tells you that the fire's coming down and decimating these armies that are going against his nation as they're basically raping and pillaging this country and taking over Jerusalem. And when Jesus sees him touch that Temple Mount, as I've said for some time, he will break that 6th seal and Jesus will destroy him. He will send surgical strikes down upon all 10 nations and they will be dead. And 7 months it will take them to bury these armies. And what do we start to see? Right after that destruction of the 6th seal, the 7th seal is then broken by Jesus, and you see the selection of the 144,000. And then we start to see in Revelation 8:1 and 2, the handing out after the 7 seals are broken, a half an hour of silence, 170 or 144,000 elect selected, and then he hands out the 7 trumpets. And so we start to see 4 trumpets hit. They knock out 1/3 of the earth. I say this is the communist Asian areas. He wants to protect the 10-horn region, the European and the Americas, because that's where the Jews and Christians are, and so he's going to force these groups of people to make a decision. And I don't want to see any group of people decimated, but I have to believe logically, if you look at this, that it has to happen to the communist areas. I'm just looking at this as a logical stance, that if he's judging the Muslims against the Jews and the Christians, that it's probably the 1/3 of the nations or the world that's going to be taken out are going to be in the communist areas. This is just what I see in this, and you may disagree with me on that. The 10-horn nations are then consolidated into 4 regions, as Daniel 8 tells us. These 10 nations are destroyed. They form into 4 regions. Then we're going to start to see this consolidation from this chaos. Think about it. 10 full nations are dead on the ground, and you're starting to see this chaos because Jesus not only pummeled them with surgical strikes from heaven. We've had a global earthquake. He's destroyed anything that matters. The temple has been cleansed at this point, so they can rebuild that 3rd temple. Damascus is destroyed at that point. The Black Rock is destroyed at that point, probably. Any installation or anything on the earth that God or Jesus wants to manipulate so that he can deal with this story that he's working us through, so that it can happen, because it's going to happen the way God says. So he's going to take out any obstacles out of his way at that point. And that 6th seal is extremely important. It's going to affect us tremendously here in the United States. And at that point, it might even take us out of commission. At that point, we can't help Israel. Israel's already been devastated. The remnant is fleeing. We've been now structurally devastated with not only disease and plagues and famine and food shortages, and now we've been hit with a global earthquake, and a third of the planet has been decimated by trumpets, and a quarter of the world has been under war through Gog, and Israel's in destruction. And so when that fifth trumpet hits and that bottomless pit opens up, we see those scorpions come out for the 5 months and sting the people without the seal of God. And then we start to see Antichrist rise from that war from heaven. At this time, we're having a war in heaven, and Michael throws Satan and a third of the angels from heaven to the earth. And then we see what? Antichrist, the little horn, rises. The false prophet rises. So you're talking about the beast of the sea, the Antichrist, and the beast of the earth, the false prophet. Both of these rise. And then and this is a resurrectional event. From this death of Gog, we are going to see Satan thrown from heaven, and Gog is going to be resurrected into Antichrist, and then he's going to overthrow the other three regions of the four, and this will then form into one diversified beast kingdom. And then he will stop the continual burnt offerings, because he will tell them not to sacrifice to anyone but him, because it's all about Antichrist at this point. And then 30 days after the continual burnt offerings are thrown down and stopped, we see that signing of the 7-year treaty of the covenant of death with the nations. Once we have that signing of the covenant of death with the nations, or the 7-year treaty between Antichrist and the nations, we work into that 1260 days. Then we have abomination of desolation. Then we have the shortened second half of the 75 days. Then we have the Lord come back on the seventh trumpet. The rapture occurs. We have that marriage. But as the elect, the martyrs and saints, are being taken from this earth, and the bowls of wrath are being placed down upon the wicked left, we will start to see that marriage occur between our Lord and his new bride. And that will take us to the Feast of Tabernacles on October 16th and 17th of 2027. So this is why Psalm 90:10 is so important. It tells us that a normal generation is 70, a strong generation is 80, and that they will not make it through the strong generation before they fly away. It tells us this. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80. Yet their span is not toil and trouble. So the 80, the 80th year, won't make it through the toil and trouble. This is the end of it. And that before they're done, they will fly away. So if you look at the state of Israel when it was proclaimed as a nation on May 14th of 1948, the normal generation is May 14th of 2018. We just went through that. We're about the second year plus into that. In Israel, the 80th generation is May 14th of 2028. And so all things will happen before the strong generation perishes, and they will fly away. That's what that's telling me. You may read that differently, and maybe that's where I'm wrong. But if you go with the Hebrew calendars and you look at the feasts and you look at God's celebrations and different things. This blowing of this trumpet this last Saturday, when they blew this trumpet on the Sabbath, this was the warning in Jeremiah 4:5-9 that tells them that they are going to bring this armies of the north against them, Gog, that they're ushering in potentially the Antichrist over time here that will bring judgment against their whole nation. That 2/3 of the Jews are going to perish, and that the Gentiles are going to trample this city for 1260 days before desolation of abomination. And then we see a horrific, this whole time's going to be horrific. Look at what's come on from the time Erdogan went into Syria, brought forth the sorrows where we are now, to the time Daniel 8's going to happen, to the time we get to the 7-year treaty, to abomination, and we actually make it to the end. It's going to be terrible on the ground. And so we need to understand that time is short. It's important that we understand what he's telling us in these different dates. What Daniel 8:12 and Psalm 90:10 are telling us, that if you break these things down, you'll start to see that all these things are going to happen in the next 7 years. So God bless everybody. Realize the only open door is through the Lord Jesus. Repent. Rethink your lives. Get right with God. Don't let the chaos of the world overtake you. It's going to be a long 7 years. We're going to be here till the seventh trumpet. And we've got to help people get through this time. So God bless everybody. Have a great night.